Okay, welcome everyone to our Erev Shabbat special edition Friday class of Parashat. Of course, this week, the exciting Perashat Vaera. And our question this week is, what is up with the hail? And of course, I'm referring to plague number 7, which is the plague of Barad, the fiery hail. And I'll explain what I'm talking about, what I'm referring to shortly. But I still want to bring up, another issue that I like to, I would say almost annually bring it up in some way, shape, or form that I think is so noticeable and everyone should be conscious of it. And that is, of course, that we have 10 makot, we have 10 plagues. Kadosh Baruch Hu meted out retribution to the Egyptians with 10 different miraculous supernatural acts. But we look at Perashat Vaera. Perashat Vaera contains 7 of them, starting with Makat Dam and ending with Makat Barad. And the other 3 are located in Perashat Bo, in next week's Parashat, Arbe, Hoshech, and Makat Bechorot. So they're broken up in 2 parashiot, 7 and 3. Now, parashiot was not done subjectively by even a Hakam along the way. These are traditional divisions passed down from Moshe Rabbeinu, from Har Sinai. So we trust that every parasha is to some extent self-contained, and although it might be a continuous story, that it lives on its own in terms of its own private storyline. What do we assume? That if any story, if any episode in the Torah that should remain cohesive and unified, it would be the 10 makot. Put all 10 in one parasha. So that's a typical question. I think it's important to ask. But let me get back to my opening question, which is the plague of Barad. I think that there's eyebrows should be raised when reading the basic surface level understanding of this makah. So if you'd like to join me, we are towards the end of the parasha. It's essentially in Perek Tet, and I'll be just referring to a few pisukim towards the end of Perek Tet. The makah begins in pasuk Kaf Bet 22, and I'll start by referring to it starts in pasuk Yud Gimal 13, and I'll start by referring to the next pasuk Yud Dalet. So Hashem tells Moshe, get up in the morning and warn Paro. This is what's awaiting him. And before he says exactly what it is, he introduces the plague. And he says, Ki b'pa'am hazot ani sholea et kol magifotai el lebecha u'ba'abadecha u'ba'amecha. He said, this time, I'm sending not just a plague, I'm sending all my plagues. Maybe that means the mother of all plagues, the dominant plague. But he says, all my plagues I'm sending to your heart to impact you, all your service to your entire nation. This is certainly a plague description and distinction that has not yet been given and will not be to any of these subsequent 3 makot. And actually there's a midrash commenting on that phrase, kol magifotai, all my plagues. It's quoted by Rashi with a little bit of a different term, but it's called Midrash Hagadol. And Midrash says, Melamed, this goes to teach you, Shishikula Makat Bara Keneged Arsed Makot, that the 7th plague of the hail is the equivalent, is as weighty as all of the other Makot put together. Interesting. To add on, in the very same pasuk, there's a reason given for this plague, and that is Ba'abu Teda Ki En Kamoni B'chol Ha'aretz, so that they should know, you should know, that no one's like me on earth, meaning like God. Now, as we're going to see, this is not unique to Bara. There are other plagues where a reason is given for the plague vis-a-vis Hashem, and we'll have that discussion at length this morning. But I want you, I want you to pay mind to the fact that that reason, the plague, is given in multiple forms, because the next pasuk says, 2 pasukim later, Tet Zayin 16, says, Uman Saper Shemi B'chol Ha'aretz. There's another objective, so that my name should be spoken about in the entire world. And later on, after the plague is perpetrated by God, and after the reaction of Par'ah, and he says, I'm going to stop it, I'll do you a favor, there's another reason given. This is all the way in Pasuk Kaftet 29, Leman Teda'aki L'Adonai Ha'aretz, so that you should know that the world, the earth is God's. So multiple purposes are given to justify and explain Barad, hail, unique to any other Makkah. The essence, you can say the essence of the Makkah itself is really incredible. This phenomenon of hail mixed with fire, and just the way that that was presented is incredible. But I think the kicker is, after the plague and the reaction of Par'ah, Pasuk Kaf Zayin 27, it's like none other. Par'ah sent to Moshe and Aharon. He couldn't even stand before them. And he says, Vayomer alehem hatati hapa'am, Adonai has-sadiq, ve'ani ve'ami har-sha'im. This time I've sinned. God is righteous. And me, myself, and my nation, we are evildoers. Now, there is something similar in Makat Arbe, and the 8th one, which starts next week's Parashah, but it's not as explicit. It does say that Hatanu, that we have sinned to Hashem, but I think this is a statement that tells it all. I mean, is this not exactly what you would like to hear from an evil world leader? I mean, isn't this what we'd like to hear from Haman or from Hitler, Yamach Shema, or any other oppressive, evil leader of a reign, of a kingdom, of an empire who have tormented and tortured us, that God is the righteous one and we are evil. It says that in Makat of Barat. And with that, the hail plague, the parasha ends. It certainly seemed there's something different about this plague than the rest. And I think that when we think about the plagues, we like to think that there's some type of graduating, advancing level of severity of plagues, of impactfulness of plagues, from Dam, meaning that Sephardeia, the frogs, if that's what they are is more severe than the blood, and the Kinim, the lice are more severe than the frogs, et cetera, et cetera. That we would think that, and I think rightly so, and it would make certainly logical sense for that progression to exist. And yet, it certainly seems at this point that number 7 is the biggie. It's quite explicit, and that it cannot be outshined by numbers 8, 9, and 10. So what is going on? We're going to shortly share a screen with you, but I want to just introduce something regarding the Makot in general. So remember, we have 2 questions to answer. Why is it broken up 7 and 3? And why is number 7 unique? So obviously there's a question that everyone asks. I wouldn't even call it a philosophical question. It's more of a pragmatic question. You know, why were the 10 plagues necessary? God could have dropped the A-bomb and lickety split got them out of Egypt. He could put them all to sleep in a temporary coma, and that would be it. Walk out, right? So that's I didn't make that question up. It's so commonly asked by many, but I think the reason or the answer in general is just as clear. If we read through the 10 plagues and we start to pick up the nuances in the terminologies, we see that there are so many patterns emerging within these plagues regarding warnings, regarding what was used, a staff or a hand, regarding the plagues themselves, where do they emanate from, et cetera, et cetera. And each one of those patterns bears out another objective that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had for presenting to the Egyptians and freeing Am Yisrael, redeeming them through 10 different plagues over the course of 1 year, as we understand traditionally. And each objective is critical, and they're been analyzed from A to Z, from Aleph to Taf, and it's a list worth of different goals that you can say that God had with his perpetration of the 10 Makot. But I think over and above, paramount to all is the objective of education. And what I mean by that is that, prior to this episode in history, God was quite private. In other words, he was privately known. The righteous people up till now, some of them pre-Abraham, and of course the forefathers, and the formation of the nation of Israel leading up to this point. But this is really, God, someone under the radar, and revealing himself to individuals, and then a group that has a traditional faith in this God. But on the world scene, no. Perashat Vaera, the 10 Makot, the scene in Egypt, is where God introduces himself to the world. It's where HaKadosh Baruch Hu says hello, and in his miraculous, supernatural presentation, starts to bring awareness to the rest of the world. You can almost say that that's a favor, not really a favor to the Egyptians, but to everybody else, to give them an opportunity to understand a God, a single, almighty creator, a primal, omniscient, all-powerful, existing, present creator. Abraham Avinu had to pull tricks out of a hat to discover God and then passed it down. But that the world deserves that opportunity, this paganistic world, and God gave it to them. God introduced himself and presented the world with so many different aspects and realms to be able to understand him and know him in different ways. So monotheism was really got great PR and publicity in the 10 Makot. Education is really objective numero uno. So I think now that we understand that, and we can see throughout the Makot, interspersed, God will actually mention a number of times that I'm bringing this plague because I want you to know, I want you to understand, I want you to believe in this aspect of me. And I humbly believe, I understand that those reasons given so that they should know me and more specified objectives are in the Pesukim are really aligned well with the different tenets of faith and belief codified by the Rambam that a Jew is obligated to believe in. I want to show you what I mean by that in this document that I'll display in a moment, and that will bring us to understanding why Barat is different and perhaps why this parasha is divided the way it is. So with no further ado, we're going to take a look right now at this chart, and there it is. So I have on the right side a listing of the 10 plagues. I have in the middle stated objective, meaning when God does state an objective, give a reason why he's bringing this plague vis-a-vis the Egyptians, seemingly, and the world at large. It's not all of them, but that's what's recorded in the middle column. And the left column in blue is what I believe to be the alignment of the foundation of faith, of the tenet of Jewish belief and faith that matches to that purpose. So here we go. You can see only the ones in red, Dam, Sephardeya, Arov, and Barad, have those stated objectives. While 3 in the middle do not, but certainly you can see left out are Arbe Choshech and Makat Bechorot, the 3 Makot that are relegated to next week's parasha. So let's look and try to explain this. So Dam, this is the first plague of blood. God said, I'm going to bring this plague. With this you'll know that I'm God. And I wrote very simply in the left side, that is the obligation for us, really mankind, but first and foremost upon Am Yisrael, to believe in the existence of a God. With this you will know that I am God. Now, what is Dam? What does the plague of blood have to do with that? Well, first of all, I think that, the Nile River played a, not just a tremendous agricultural function in Egypt, but it was deified, right? The Nile River was a god. And here, for God to be able to defy the Nile River, to control it, to pollute it, right? So certainly that is an affront against their paganistic beliefs. And so knowing I am God, introducing myself as God, was certainly fulfilled in the plague of blood. Further, you can also say that besides barad, hail, which we'll get to, blood is the only plague where something new was, so to speak, created. And this idea of yesh me'ayin, where God creates something from nothing, is part and parcel of the belief in a God and a creator. The next one, Sephardeah, the frogs. Stated objective is, Leman tedaki en kadonai Eloheinu. I'm bringing this plague so you should know that there is no one like Hashem, our God. And I think that that aligns nicely to the idea of Ahdut Hashem, the oneness of God. There is no one, nothing else. There's only a God. There's a single God. And also, no one like God, meaning en lo guf, he has no body. There's two separate tenets of faith. And I think Sephardeah very nicely demonstrates those tenets of faith, where, first of all, they filled, right? It says very explicitly in the Pesukim that they filled the entire land. They were absolutely everywhere. So that they sort of showed an idea of oneness. And there's a very interesting midrash, you probably learned it as kids, but there was one giant frog and Moshe Rabbeinu hit that giant frog and it released other frogs. And I like to think that possibly that was symbolizing a philosophical idea. And that is that God is not part of the world is part of God. Everything emanates from God, and possibly that idea of a giant frog and things emanating from that frog symbolize that idea. So oneness of God, lack of body. Kinim, the makah of lice, does not have a stated objective, but arov, the wild animals, does. Plague number 4, Leman teda ki ani Adonai b'chirep ha'aretz. So you should know that I am God amidst the land. I am present. I am here. Part of that idea is what we call omnisciency, which means God knows all. And the way that Rambam studies is he, as left side column records, Yodea mahshavot b'nei adam, that God knows the thoughts of men, because God, nothing eludes God. God knows everything. And I think you see that in the abstract, incredible manner that this wild animal makah was presented, where it says they didn't cross to the Jewish neighborhoods. There was like an invisible border. It was very abstract and intangible, where somehow there was containment. Somehow there was control and organization of these, it's a paradox, right? These wild animals were contained to some extent, and they were limited to the Egyptians. And I think that very nicely demonstrates this idea that God is present, this intangible idea that, you know, he is the all-knowing one, like the intangible boundaries of the wild animals. But here comes, and then Dever and Shehin, the pestilence and the boils, no stated objective. And here comes Barad. You can just see this box of the hail, fire, plague is larger. And that's because, as we said in the beginning, there are 3 different stated objectives. The first one is Ba'abu tadaki en kamoni b'chol ha'aretz, to know that no one is like me in the land. And that is obviously the tenet of both faith and avodah l'zulato. There is no other means of worship besides God, which then defies all forms of paganism, avodah zarah, and any types of these other religions that are not monotheistic. I put the second one in brackets because it might be somewhat attached to the first. That I should be known in the rest of the land. But then the last one, to know that this world is God's. It was always God's. He was always here. God is primal. God pre-existed this universe of ours. And this great makah of Barad demonstrates just so much. Of course, it demonstrates just in its power and its might, the mother of all plagues, as the Torah describes it, that there is no other possible power on earth that could have meted out this plague. And as the plague itself states, that this is the first time this has ever happened in world history, it really demonstrates God's oneness, God's omniscience. There's so much, and the Torah goes out of its way to state 1, 2, 3 different objectives of this plague vis-a-vis the education of the world. And at this point in time, at this plague, and we'll come back to everyone's faces, at this point, it's very fair to say that in terms of world education, in terms of enlightenment of the Egyptians and the rest of the countries and peoples of the world, in terms of being able to facilitate the cognizance and the knowledge that there is a God and all the aspects of God, all those objectives have been met, ending with Makat Bara. It didn't have a permanent impact, but it did its job. All of these purposes have been exhausted in terms of this intro, God's hello to the world. Here endeth the lesson at Makat Barad, 1 Dam through 7, the hail. That was the greatest objective for the 10 plagues, drawing out throughout the course of a year. Now, the other 3, as you'll read in Perashat Bo in the beginning, it speaks about L'ma'an Tesaper Be'oznei Bencha Ben Bencha. It speaks of education, but specifically to the Jewish people. And so somehow we have to figure this out, maybe next week. But 8, 9, and 10 really stands on its own. It's a self-contained plague, the Makat Bechorot, the killing of the firstborns. But the 8 and 9 certainly were spelled out as more of an education directly to the Jewish people. And therefore, 7 and 3 were divided that manner. Because that first 7 in Perashat Vaera was really accomplishing and fulfilling this broad, bold objective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the plagues to bring awareness to the rest of the world through these plagues of what a monotheistic people means, what a single God means, and being punctuated with this great, incredible plague called Barad, called the hail, and Hashem, in his very outspoken way, saying hello to the rest of the world. Shabbat Shalom.